Hello and welcome. You are watching South Asia Diary with me, Mariam Wardak. As 2022 winds down, let's reflect on the stories of South Asia, the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of countries and the people. Our top focus on the show today is how the economies in South Asia fared this year. Remember, the world barely recovered from the worst of the COVID pandemic this year, a once-in-a-century event that left most economies battered, and while some countries bounced back, for most the economic challenges remain grave. 2022 was a year when India overtook the United Kingdom as the fifth largest economy in the world and also emerged as the world's fastest growing major economy. However, for India's neighbors in South Asia, it's been a dramatically opposite story, with their economies collapsing and facing unprecedented crises or struggling to stay afloat. Here's a report.
"2022 has been a dynamic year for South Asia. Just coming out of the COVID-19 crisis, countries were faced with myriad challenges. Some glided through the crisis, some barely managed to swim through, while others sank. A few weeks ago, the World Bank issued a statement on South Asian economies. It said growth in the region is slowing down, and the reasons are Sri Lanka's economic collapse, the deadly Pakistan floods, a global economic slowdown, and the lingering scars of the pandemic. The outlook sounds grim, but one nation sitting at the center of the region was able to manage the economic situation with relative ease. We're talking about India. It is set to become the fastest growing economy in 2023 as post-pandemic retail booms and recent balance sheet repairs bring in new investments. Talking about post-pandemic growth, India's export and service sector staged a stronger recovery than the world average, while its ample foreign reserves served as a buffer to external shocks. According to a recent survey carried out by the Indian Central Bank, the South Asian power's economy is expected to grow at 6% in the next fiscal year. While the 6% figure is lower than the current 6.8% projected growth, the outlook is in sharp contrast to the global projections. The war in Ukraine has impacted the West hard. Inflation in the United States and European countries has gone through the roof, prompting a dive in their fiscal figures. While talking about South Asian economies, Sri Lanka is a name that cannot be missed. In 2022, the island nation saw the worst financial crisis in its history, a watershed moment for the country. When over a decade of financial mismanagement added up to Colombo's economy grinding to a halt. The factors that triggered the collapse were unchecked external borrowings, tax cuts that increased the budget deficit, and restrictions on the import of chemical fertilizers. The COVID-19 pandemic was the final nail in the coffin. For the first time in its independent history, Sri Lanka defaulted on its foreign debt in the month of May. Its usable foreign reserves were left at a mere $25 million. Its currency fell by 80%, and food inflation figures stood at a record 90% high. The fiscal crisis triggered a never-seen-before uprising in the country. That cost the Rajapaksas their government. Commentators seized on Sri Lanka's economic collapse as a cautionary tale. It was an illustration of the dangers of overdependence on Chinese loans. The disproportionate effects far-off conflicts can have on poor countries and the costs of years of economic misgovernance. Elsewhere in South Asia, Bangladesh, Nepal and Pakistan each faced similar economic woes this year, but none as severe as Sri Lanka's. Let's now look at India's next-door neighbor, Pakistan. With foreign reserves rapidly plunging and no relief in near sight, the Pakistan economy is staring at impending doom. For months, its currency has been floating over the 200 mark against the dollar. There's a high-risk premium in international financial markets, a high debt burden, and the recent shock of the devastating floods, adding to Islamabad's tragic tale of an economic downturn. As challenges kept piling up on the economic front, the country's foreign exchange reserves have dipped below $7 billion. And the fear of bankruptcy is rapidly growing. The country is in dire need of foreign aid to reduce its current account deficit and to ensure enough reserves to pay its debt obligations for the next financial year. The situation was bad to start with, but became drastically worse after Pakistan witnessed catastrophic flooding. With losses pegged at over $15 billion, millions of crops were damaged or destroyed, heightening food insecurity. The war in Ukraine and the consequent global crude oil crisis hit Bangladesh hard. Poor export demand, high inflation, falling remittances, depleting forex reserves and an energy crisis swiftly eroded the economy's fundamentals, taking it on a downward spiral, stirring political unrest, civilian frustration and deepening problems for the country's sizable poor population.
2022 was a year when many analysts believe India's foreign policy truly came of age. In the face of strong criticism from the Western media over its continuous ties with Russia and Russian oil imports in a year when its invasion of Ukraine made Russia an international pariah, India stood its ground, exposing Western hypocrisy and placing its national interests above all else. Prime Minister Modi's words of advice to Russian President Vladimir Putin that this is not an era of war resonated globally and were echoed by several world leaders. Having asserted itself on a global stage, India enters 2023 as the chair of the powerful G20 grouping, and the country's stance on major global issues could well shape the international discourse in the coming months and years ahead. Take a look at our next report.
If 2022 was marked by the Russia-Ukraine war, it was also a watershed for India's foreign policy, as the country asserted itself on the global stage like never before. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February, the international outrage was swift, turning Moscow into an international pariah overnight. Then came the crippling sanctions and a near-unanimous call for the complete isolation of Vladimir Putin and his country. One world leader after another, led by US President Joe Biden, condemned Putin's aggression, labeling him a ruthless dictator whose reckless actions had not only violated Ukraine's sovereignty but also jeopardized the security of Europe. As a barrage of tough measures were announced, the deepest cut came in the form of sweeping sanctions on Russian oil. The message was loud and clear. NATO and its allies were determined to hit Moscow where it would hurt and expected the rest of the international community to follow suit. But in the face of intense pressure from the West, India chose to forge its own path, deciding to remain neutral in the war. Prime Minister Narendra Modi played the peacemaker, reaching out to both sides and appealing for peace and dialogue. On multiple occasions, Prime Minister Modi spoke to the presidents of both Russia and Ukraine, urging the two leaders to immediately end hostilities and return to the path of negotiations, a stance that was welcomed by the international community. The next big test for India was on the energy front, and it took the unpopular decision to continue importing Russian oil despite Western sanctions. Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar announced unapologetically that India was going to act in its national interest, and safeguarding the interests of the Indian people took precedence over everything else. Every time the Western media questioned India's decision to buy oil from Russia, accusing it of adding to Putin's war chest, Foreign Minister Jaishankar pulled no punches, calling out the Western hypocrisy on the issue. Determined not to let the West dictate its foreign policy decisions, India also chose to abstain nearly every time there was a vote on a UN resolution condemning Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. When faced with criticism over India-Russia ties, Foreign Minister Jaishankar displayed no qualms in describing it as a strong, steady and time-tested relationship. India's autonomy in foreign policy earned rich praise, even from former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan. India's voice had the strongest resonance on the world stage when, on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Uzbekistan, Prime Minister Modi told Russian President Vladimir Putin this is not an era of war.
एक्सेलेंसी मैं जानता हूं कि आज का युग युद्ध का है नहीं और हमने फोन पर भी कई बार आपसे इस विषय में बात की है कि डेमोक्रेसी और डिप्लोमेसी और डायलॉग ये सारी बातें ऐसी हैं कि जो दुनिया को एक स्पर्श करती हैं.
Not only was Prime Minister Modi's message to Putin welcomed and endorsed by world leaders, it was also incorporated into the official communique issued at the G20 summit in Bali. If India's unflinching stand on the Russia-Ukraine war and its consistent message of peace cemented its position as a strong and independent player on the geopolitical landscape, taking over the G20 presidency towards the end of the year signalled its arrival on the big stage. In the last couple of years of the COVID pandemic, India has also been lauded for its vaccine diplomacy. Now, as India gears up to host the G20 summit in 2023, it is well positioned to leave a mark on the world map.
Our final story on the show today is from Pakistan, a country that has witnessed one of its most challenging years in 2022. This was a year when Pakistan was struck by catastrophic floods, the worst in its history. The impact is still being felt by millions of Pakistanis. The country also went through a long period of extreme political unrest. A prime minister ousted from office by a no-trust vote for the very first time, massive street protests against the new government, an assassination attempt on the former prime minister, the appointment of a new army chief amidst unprecedented political attacks on the all-power institution. And the political turmoil is far from over even as Pakistan ushers in 2023. Here's our next report.
Many in Pakistan would be happy to see the back of 2022. The year gone by was pockmarked by enormous challenges on multiple fronts. Political chaos, economic turmoil, devastating floods, a rash of terror attacks. This is what Pakistan's year looked like. The month of April witnessed one of the most dramatic events in recent years. After weeks of turmoil, Prime Minister Imran Khan was ousted from office through a no-confidence vote brought in by a united opposition, helped in no small measure by a revolt within the ruling coalition, led by Khan's own party, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, or PTI. Khan became the first Pakistan Prime Minister in history to be removed by a no-trust vote.
The resolution for vote of no confidence against Mr. Imran Khan.
A bitter Imran Khan lashed out at the opposition, accusing it of acting as a pawn in a foreign conspiracy to topple his government. Just days later, he named the United States as the country that had plotted his ouster, in cahoots with his political opponents, a charge vehemently denied by the US and the current ruling party.
पाकिस्तान की ये जो नो कॉन्फिडेंस मोशन थी, इसमें से बैरून मुल्क की इंटरफेरेंस थी.
Now I request Mia Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif Sahab to please take the seat of the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Khan's unceremonious exit paved the way for Shehbaz Sharif to become Prime Minister.
पहला मौका है कि वोट ऑफ नो कॉन्फिडेंस की मोशन कामयाब हुई और हक की कामयाबी हुई और बातिल को शिकस्त हुई.
No sooner had the new government taken office, Pakistan was struck by an unprecedented catastrophe. The monsoon rain between June and October unleashed the worst floods the country had witnessed in its entire existence. The monstrous floods left 1/3 of the country underwater. 33 million people were impacted. More than 1,700 lost their lives. Hundreds of them were children. 2 million homes were wiped out. 13,000 kilometers of road networks and thousands of acres of agricultural land were destroyed.
Here was my house. My entire life savings are gone.
The crippling losses caused by the catastrophic floods are estimated to be in excess of $15 billion. A huge setback for a country whose economy was already in deep crisis. The situation in the flood-hit areas still remains bleak, as millions of people are without roofs over their heads, and the biting winter cold is only aggravating their misery. But even as scores of ordinary Pakistanis continue to battle for survival, the politicians remain busy with endless power struggles. In late October, Imran Khan launched his much-hyped Long March from Lahore to the capital, Islamabad. The march was Khan's protest against the Shehbaz Sharif government, which he has labelled a corrupt puppet regime. The purpose? To pressurize the government into holding immediate elections, a demand summarily rejected by the Prime Minister. Just days after it began, Imran Khan's Long March took a dramatic turn when a mega rally in the eastern city of Wazirabad became the scene of an assassination attempt on the PTI chief. Imran Khan was quick to apportion blame for the attack. He trained his guns on Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the Interior Minister, and a senior army officer, directly accusing them of plotting to kill him.
There can be no investigation if the Prime Minister, the Interior Minister, and this ISI guy, Faisal, Major General Faisal, if these three are involved, there can be no independent investigation.
Recent months have also seen the PTI chairman launch a barrage of attacks on the all-powerful army. The same army which Khan's critics say had propped him up and brought him to power in the first place. Khan has accused army generals of being hand in glove with the opposition and the United States in a plot to unseat him. Things came to a head, and in an unprecedented move that left all of Pakistan stunned, the chief of the country's spy agency, the ISI, addressed an explosive press conference. This was the first time in Pakistan's history that the head of the spy agency directly addressed the media. Amidst the political attacks, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif chose Lieutenant General Asim Munir as the new army chief. And while Imran Khan has been more conciliatory towards the new army chief, he continues to slam his predecessor, General Qamar Javed Bajwa. Khan has also repeatedly accused former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who has been living in exile in London, of running the Pakistan government by proxy. And adding to the high political drama that's been playing out in Pakistan, the ruling party and the opposition PTI have both been accused of regularly leaking damaging audio tapes to embarrass their opponents. But it's not just politics that has added to Pakistan's woes. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, designated as a global terrorist group by the US, has lately intensified attacks in Pakistan, killing hundreds of people, mostly security forces. As Pakistan ushers in 2023, one thing is clear. The year gone by will cast a long shadow as the country continues to reel under enormous challenges.
And that brings us to the end of this special year-end edition of South Asia Diary. We want to thank you, our viewers, for staying with us through this year as we brought you the biggest and most fascinating stories from South Asia, week after week. South Asia Diary will be back with you in the new year with all the actions. But for now, it is goodbye. And here's wishing you a happy, healthy, and safe new year.